Hello, I'm Michael Bunch. I'm the plant pathologist at the North Dakota State University Carrington Research Extension Center. Two of the questions I get very often about white mold management in dry beans are: one, what is the economic return to 1 versus 2 versus 3 fungicide applications targeting white mold in dry beans? And two, if I'm going to make more than one application, how many days apart should those applications be? What I'd like to do right now is share with you results from the first year of field trials evaluating these research questions. The reason why we did this research is because white mold management is not very good even at optimal application timing. We consider 50% disease reductions to be good, and honestly and obviously that's not very good. And then second, applying at that perfect fungicide application timing to achieve 50% disease control is very difficult. Dry bean growth and development is variable within most fields, so the growth stage is not the same all the way across, and not every day is a suitable day for spraying. And there's an enormous penalty to applying the fungicide too early and a penalty to applying it too late when conditions favor white mold as we enter bloom. I strongly suggest that you review the fungicide application timing research that I have posted online. The purpose of this study then was to evaluate whether we could improve fungicide performance by modifying application interval or the number of applications made. And the idea behind this is that we cannot do anything about the fact that we have a penalty to applying the fungicide too late, because that penalty is due to the fact that we can't eradicate an existing white mold infection. What we can possibly do something about is eliminate the penalty to applying, or reduce the penalty to applying the fungicide too early. The penalty associated with applying the fungicide too early is caused by the fact that the new growth that the dry bean plants put on after you sprayed the fungicide is not protected by the fungicide. There's not enough translocation of that fungicide in the growing tip to that new growth to confer meaningful levels of white mold management. As a consequence, that new growth is unprotected. Now, if we tighten the interval between applications, we'll be protecting that new growth sooner, which should give us better disease control. The challenge is that by applying that fungicide earlier, now that second application may no longer give us protection to the end of the season, and then a third application may be needed. So this research seeks to evaluate the impact of tightening our application interval, both on disease control with 2 applications, as well as the potential need to add a third application. We conducted the testing in Carrington in kidney beans seeded to 14-inch rows, a seeding rate of 90,000 viable seeds an acre. All applications were made with a tractor-mounted sprayer that's PTO driven with an application speed of 6.0 miles an hour and a fungicide spray volume of 15 gallons an acre. The fungicide dropicide was calibrated relative to canopy characteristics. I would recommend that you review the information that I have provided in a parallel presentation on fungicide droplet size optimization for white mold management in kidney beans. We conducted the study with 9 experimental replicates. The idea and the reason for doing a large number of experimental replicates is because white mold disease pressure tends to be spatially inconsistent. There are areas of high disease pressure and low disease pressure in short distances, and this is typical. And by having a large number of experimental replicates, we increase the odds that every treatment will be exposed to areas of high disease pressure versus low disease pressure approximately the same number of times. We assessed white mold at or near dry bean maturity by evaluating every plant individually in a minimum of half of the rows per plot for the percent of the plant impacted by white mold. Harvest was done by simulating knifing. We clipped the plants at the base in the entire plot. We windrowed them, allowed them to dry down, and then passed the windrowed plants through the combine. What we did by doing this is we eliminated any variability in the yield data caused by differences in lodging across the study, i.e. we eliminated the noise in the yield data that would have been caused by differences in standability that we would have seen had we tried to straight cut these dry beans. Supplemental irrigation was applied as needed to establish the white mold disease pressure that was required to evaluate these different fungicide treatments. The tractor-mounted sprayer that we utilized had a pulse width modulation system, and we set the pulse width manually based on the measured spray output. We collected the spray output after running the sprayer for exactly 10.0 seconds, and we did this with the fungicide in the tank. We did this immediately before applying the fungicide, with the fungicide in the tank. If the output was not perfect, we changed the pulse width until it was perfect, such that we had precisely 15.0 gallons an acre spray volume at our 6.0 mile an hour driving speed. The applications were made with this tractor-mounted sprayer. Now, this picture was taken in soybeans, but the exact same method was utilized in the dry beans. We have a driving pass for the tractor. This driving pass was smooth with the strawberry cultivator to make sure that there are no major bumps and that the boom would not sway. And by avoiding the boom swing, we ensured that the nozzles were always 20 inches above the canopy as recommended by the nozzle manufacturer for the 110 degree nozzles that we utilized. As I play the corresponding video in the next slide, what you'll notice is that the sprayer operator turns on that boom before he gets to that blue flag, and then turns it off after the blue flag. And then there's a short distance before he gets to the next flag. What we did is we sprayed a 10-foot width with nozzle overlap. That was the plot width. And then what we did is we had a transition zone on the front and the back of every treatment plot to allow the sprayer operator to turn on and off the boom while maintaining the 6.0 mile an hour driving speed. And those transition zones are not harvested. They're not assessed for disease. This allows us to spray our treatments, have an area for turning on and off the sprayer that does not confound the results on the neighboring plots. So now I'm going to show you that video. So what did we learn? This slide presents yield data in bar graphs, and just to the left of the yield data, disease severity data, the percent of the canopy exhibiting white mold at or near driving maturity. Those disease data are numbers with a yellow-brown shading. You'll notice we tested 5 different application timings versus non-treated control in every single fungicide application frequency and interval treatment. When we made more than one application, the first application timing was always done at the same growth stage, and then the second application was done the third application was made either approximately 10 days, at approximately 10-day interval, or approximately 12-day interval. Now, I want you to look at the non-treated control. What you'll notice is that the disease pressure varied across the non-treated controls. In some of the fungicide application frequency and interval treatments, we had disease pressure up to even 40% of the canopy diseased, while in others, we had disease pressure as low as 27 or 28% of the canopy diseased. Thus, despite the fact that we conducted this study with 9 experimental replicates, we still had sufficient variability in white mold pressure in the footprint of the study that some of these application frequency and interval treatments ended up on areas of high disease pressure more often than others. And this translated into yields. You'll notice that those non-treated controls with low levels of disease also had higher yields. This makes sense. Now, the fungicide application timings within any given application frequency and interval treatment, say 2 applications approximately 10 days apart, approximately 10 days apart, all those application timings were tested spatially very close to their corresponding non-treated control. And so because of that, you can conclude that those application timings were subjected to a very similar level of disease pressure as that non-treated control. And what matters then is the yield gain we conferred by the fungicide under that environment, because that determines, of course, the profitability of that treatment. Because of this, I have presented yield gain numbers. Now this is the average yield gain across all 5 fungicide application timings within each fungicide application frequency and interval treatment. If you look at those average yield gains, right away you'll see that 2 applications was markedly better than a single application, but only if we had our application interval correct. We need to have an application interval of approximately 10 or 12 days apart. And then if you look at 3 applications, you'll notice that we made even bigger gains by going to 3 applications, but again, only if we got our application interval correct. We needed to have those 3 applications approximately 7 days apart. And if you notice the average yield gain across those 5 application timings, it was over 50% higher than any of the other yield gains across any of the other frequency and interval treatments. It was so good that even though that particular frequency and interval treatment ended up on areas of really high disease pressure, we achieved levels of disease control and levels of yield that rival the best levels of disease control and yield across the entire study. So let's look at these results another way. In this slide, I have bar graphs in dark blue shading that show the average yield observed across all 5 fungicide application timings. As I indicated previously, this is not the most informative metric because this average yield is relative to a non-treated control that showed significant variability in the average yield and the disease pressure, corresponding disease pressure. What really matters is the yield gain conferred by the fungicide under the conditions that that fungicide application frequency and interval treatment was exposed. And I have presented that as a scatter plot. The circles show the yield gain conferred by the fungicide in an individual application timing. The bars show the average yield gain across all 5 fungicide application timings. What is optimal in this case is having the maximum average yield gain and as little variability as possible in the yield gain conferred by the fungicide across application timings. What we want is flexibility on when we can spray. And if we have flexibility on our application timings, what you're going to find is that the yield gain conferred by the fungicide is going to be very similar irrespective of when we applied it, which means those circles will be tight, not widely spread out. So let's look at a single fungicide application. You can see right away that the yield gain conferred by the fungicide is relatively modest and that the spread in the circles is wide. What this means is that the average gain conferred by the fungicide with a single application was not very high, i.e. the disease control was not very good, and that the application timing mattered tremendously. In order to get a good response from a single fungicide application, you had to make sure your application timing was perfect. Now let's look at 2 applications, either 7, approximately 10, or 12 days apart. You'll see that we did not achieve statistical separation here, but there's a very clear trend where we increased the yield gain conferred by the fungicide as we moved from 7 days apart to approximately 10 or 12 days apart. And if you compare the approximately 10 and 12 day apart treatments, you'll notice that that 12 day apart treatment was driven by a single fungicide application timing that gave us a great response, and the rest of the timings were really quite suboptimal. So on balance, the approximately 10 days apart performed better because we had more flexibility in our application timing to achieve that outcome of approximately 360 pounds an acre yield gain conferred by the fungicide. Now let's look at 3 applications, 7, approximately 10 or 12 days apart. what you can see immediately is we got a phenomenal response to applying 3 applications 7 days apart. The average yield gain is very, very strong, and then the spread of the drop of those circles is relatively tight, with even the worst circles being at a comparable level as our best results in the other application frequency and timing treatments. What this means is that we had considerable flexibility on our application timing, and we had very consistent results across those application timings and very, very high average yield gain. And so what these results indicate is that if you can afford to do 3 fungicide applications, you should make those applications 7 days apart. If you cannot afford to make 3 applications and you can only do 2, it looks like those 2 applications to be spaced approximately 10 days apart, but then you need to really be careful about your application timing. So again, what these results indicate is that 3 applications 7 days apart may optimize white mold management in kidney beans, and when making 2 sequential fungicide applications rather than 3, approximately 10 days between applications may be optimal. Now, I want to stress that these are preliminary results from the first year of testing. We need to see results over multiple years and environments before we can have confidence in these recommendations, before we can develop rigorous recommendations. The other thing I would like to stress is that while this testing was conducted with Endura in every single application, that is not what I would recommend. We typically see much better disease control when we rotate fungicide chemistries, and also rotating fungicide chemistries gives us a tool for preventing the buildup of fungicide resistance. Okay, and so we used Endura in every application here simply for logistical reasons, because that was the most efficient way to conduct the study. We could load up the sprayer, calibrate the pulse width, and go out and spray every single treatment that needed to be treated that day without having to go back to the yard, clean out the sprayer, and mix up new product, and then go back through that field. Before I close, I'd like to give very sincere thanks to my staff, Aaron Faust, Swan Collis, Jesse Hafner, Gabby Henson, and our seasonal student workers. It is the efforts of these staff that make this research possible, and they work very hard and they work long hours. I'd also like to give sincere thanks to the funding agencies that made this research possible. The North Harvest Bean Growers Association, these are your checkoff dollars. The North Dakota Crop Protection Product Harmonization and Registration Board, administered by the North Dakota Department of Agriculture. These 2 funding agencies provided the grant funds that paid for the salaries of my staff and also paid for the supplies and the equipment repairs associated with conducting this research. I'd also like to give thanks to the companies that conduct contract testing with us. It is the funds from that testing that allows us to purchase the equipment needed to do this research. That tractor you saw in that video, that was purchased with these funds from contract testing. Our sprayer was built with funds from that contract testing. Our combine was purchased with funds from that contract testing. That contract testing gives us the flexible spending dollars needed to be able to buy the equipment needed to do this research. Finally, I'll give my very sincere thanks to Kurt Bollingberg from Bollingberg Seeds and John Berthold at Green Valley Bean Company, who donated the seed for executing these fungicide application frequency and interval studies. With that, thank you for your time and attention. I hope that this research is of value to your operations.